Welcome to our sew along for a sheath dress. Today we're going to use Vogue 9050, right? And we're going to be making two versions. We're going to make this version and this version. So the green one is version B. We're going to make that all out of one fabric, and then we're going to make a modified version A out of two different fabrics. So you'll have an opportunity to see two different sheath dresses come together. I like Vogue. If you're going to use the big four patterns, then I suggest you use Vogue. They're a little bit more complicated, but they also have a little bit more style, and I think they're vetted better. They're definitely an easier pattern to manipulate. Because this sheath dress has fitted princess seams in the front and the back and the sides, there's lots of opportunities to make the garment fit our bodies and fit them really well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but certainly you should look at our fitting series if you are interested in perfecting the fit for your garments, particularly the princess seam. But what we're going to do is we're going to do this solid version, which is version B, and we're going to do it out of this really cute giraffe linen. So you can see there's no stretch going this way on the linen, and there is no stretch. So this has got to fit. It's not going to be optional for it to have a little give. So we're going to do the first version of this, and we're going to have this giraffe print going this way. You can see how that giraffe print looks really great. So that's the first one. Once we get that one where we like it, because we can do a little tweaking with the print and you won't notice it quite as much, then we're going to make it out of a zebra, a black zebra with some faux leather and suede. So you can see this zebra, and again, I think this has no stretch at all in this. But for the side panels, and if you see in version A, they have side panels here. For the side panels, we're going to use black pleather. So we're going to use these. This is going to be the center of the dress, and then these are going to be the side panels. And this has a little bit of stretch. All right, going this way, has a little bit of stretch. So it gives us a little bit of movement in the dress, so we can make it a little bit more body conscious, whereas with the linen, it has to skim over the body and there isn't room for movement. With this faux leather or pleather in it with the, goes this way, only stretches this way, with the stretch going around the circumference. So on the sides, you'll have these two panels that will stretch alongside this. So we are going to get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take out our pattern pieces that were required for this sew along, trim them up to the size that we want, and press them because we want them to have a nice flat surface. And same thing with this linen. We are going to press it so there's no wrinkles, because a wrinkle will change the dimensions of your garment. Whether it's circumference or length, you don't want any wrinkles inside that garment. So if you take out the paper inside of the pattern, the first page shows you the pattern pieces, right? And all of the little pieces here. And then there's a list down here, for those of you that have never done this before, there's a list down here and it will tell you what pieces that you need. So for the first version, we're going to do version B. The first one, we're going to do version B, this one here, this green one, out of the a giraffe print. So if I look at this list, it says for dress B, I need the front, the upper side, the lower side, the front interfacing, the upper back, the lower back, the back interfacing. So that's pieces 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't need the sleeve because there's no sleeve on this. This is totally, this green one, this is totally sleeveless. So there's no sleeves, so I don't need any of the sleeves to go with that. And for interfacing, I use a tricot. That's a stretch interfacing, so it moves with the garment. I like that. That's the only kind of interfacing I buy, unless I'm making a coat, then I would use something a little heavier. But tricot works really best. So I'm going to press my garment, cut out the pieces for the size that I want, press my pattern pieces, trim out, press my pattern pieces, and then cut everything out. And we'll get sewing. See you in a bit. And we're back. We have all our pieces cut out now, and I just want to talk to you about a couple of things about the pattern before we move forward. and how to go about cutting some of these pieces out. So I'm going to put you down at the table so I can explain everything down here. All right, so one of the things that you want to look at is the shading key, and that's really important. And on this pattern, it's on the back page of the first page. If it's a dark-sided picture, part of the diagram, if it's dark-sided, that's the right side. If it's white, it's the wrong side. If it's stippled like this, it's the interfacing. If it's got these drag lines on it, it's the lining. And if it has hash marks, it's the underlining. We don't have any underlining in this dress, but we do have right side, wrong side, interfacing, and lining. So those are things to keep in mind. As you're looking at the diagram, you can tell that this is the right side of the fabric because it's dark. On here, you're looking at the wrong side of the fabric. So those are things to keep in mind as we move forward. A couple of other things. When I put my pieces together, I keep the tissue with them, right? And in this pattern, you need to make sure that the bottoms of piece 1 and I think it's the center back, whatever that is, Izzy has this extra section here for a different version. It's for the full skirt version. We don't need that. So when we cut this, we need to just fold this out of the way. You're going to cut your fashion fabric, and then I lay my fashion fabric on top of my lining, and I go back and I cut my lining. And since my lining is very similar on both sides, I put a pin on the right side of every piece. That way I know which side is the right side of my lining as soon as I pick it up. I don't have to think about it, and I don't end up with two lefts or two rights, or a piece that has one piece is shiny and the other piece is matte. One of the important things we want to think about is these markings here. I don't want you cutting into the seam allowance of the fabric. Even though there's a 5/8 inch seam allowance, which is pretty hefty, you still don't want to be clipping into the fabric. It's like cutting into a support beam. So if you need to cut into it on a curve, that's totally different, and we make compensation for that. But right now, no need to cut in. If you really want to mark these pieces, you can cut out. If that makes you feel better, you can go this way as you go around them, and you'll have single notches and double notches. I prefer a pin. So in order to mark it with a pin, I just kind of slide it back a little and put a pin in there, and then I'm going to put a pin on the other side based on this pin, and that piece is marked. And then I'm going to slide down here because I need to mark this also, because our first order of business with the fashion fabric is to sew a stay stitch between these two marks. So the first instructions in step number 1 on the front, it says stay stitch side front edge of front 1 between upper notches. So this is pattern piece 1. This is the front, and we're going to stitch the side of it, and we're just going to stay stitch between these two notches, and that keeps it from stretching out of shape, and gives us the opportunity to manipulate it without, because this is a little bit cut on the bias a little bit. Stay stitching, you're just going to do a straight stitch on each piece, so it's not holding anything together, it's just there as a support, and you're going to stitch for about, I'd say 3/8 of an inch on the way in, just a straight stitch, and you're going to do it on both pieces, the left side and the left front and the right front. We're going to go do that, and then we'll be back. Okay, we put our stay stitching in, and you can see I left the pins in there so you can see I put them back in. It's just to keep this from stretching out. So that completes step 1, stay stitching in piece 1. So I'm going to put all of piece 1 pieces back together because we're going to move on to a different piece. So we're getting everything ready, essentially prepped before we start sewing it. That's why I like to keep it all together. It's all with the pattern piece. Now the next step, step 2, it says pin upper side front, which is piece 2. Right, here's upper side front, piece 2, to lower side front, piece 3, and then we're going to press the seam upward. So here is piece 3, and you can see that this is the side piece that goes along. That's this panel here that we're making, this panel, because there's a seam in here to give you more of a waist definition. So we're going to put the bottom piece to the top piece right sides together. And yes, it goes at an angle, and yes, it looks a little weird. but one edge will match up nicely, and then the other edge will have this little tail, because that gives us the angle, because we're going to be stitching like right in there, right? That's our seam allowance. So you can put in as many pins as necessary, but you want them to end up nice and straight. And I've stitched one for you already, and you can see that there's a seam there, and you can see this little tail because of the way when you press the seam up towards the top, that little tail stick. You can just clip that off, that's fine. So this is our side front panel. This happens to be of this side over here, right? And you can see that that emulates this green panel right here, right? So we're gonna do the other one, and then we'll move on to step 3. All right, I've sewed both of my side fronts together, piece 2 and piece 3 at the waist. And we're gonna skip step 3 because that step 3 in the instructions is for view D and view F, and that's sewing on that big full circle skirt. We're not doing that, we're doing a pencil skirt. So step 4 says pin side section to front, clipping front where necessary, stitch from lower edge to small circle. So here are my 2 sides. I'm going to drape them over the table, but you can see that they're the side because this is the sleeve or the armhole opening, and then I'm going to decide which front piece goes with which side piece. And I know, so I have 2 sides and 2 fronts, and I want this front piece to line up here because this is my neck edge, right? So you can see now there's the shoulder seam here, this is the armhole, and this is the front neck. Now, one of the features of this dress is that it has this little slit front, which you can see here on this one. So that's why there's a seam down the center front, and we'll deal with that when we go to put the facing in. But right now, we want to sew this side piece to this center front. This is the center front of my dress, right? This is the center front. This is the side front. So this goes over the chest from the shoulder down. So we're going to turn this way, and we are going to pin it. And when you pin something like this linen is very bouncy. You want to pin the bottom, right? Because we want these to end, if we cut them right, they should end up being the same size, right? And then you're going to pin the top. And then you're going to work your way around to make sure that it fits. All right. And we're going to pin this all the way right, so I'm going to finish pinning this. I'm going to finish pinning this, both pieces, and I'm going to come back and sew them together. So essentially we're taking piece 1, right, and then the unit of piece 2 and 3, and we're sewing them together at this seam right here. This is the seam we're sewing. You can see it better with the black and white. We're sewing that seam. That's the seam that we're sewing. So this is 1, and this is 2 and 3 sewn together, and now we're going to create this seam on this side and this seam on this side. All right, we are buzzing right along. We just finished step 4, where we sewed the side piece 2 and 3 to piece 1, and we made sure that this pressed seam allowance is sewn upwards, and we matched all the notches if you're marking notches along the way, and they end up at the same spot. One of the things I want to do is I want to press that seam, and I can't emphasize the importance of pressing a seam. If you can see, or as you can see, I should say, this seam is laying really nice and flat, and this fabric is very bouncy, and that's because I pressed it. So I have pressed this one, and you can see how beautiful that seam lies. So when I go to sew something else, this one will already be ready. So this one isn't pressed, and see how bumpy and floppy it is? It's not laying flat. This is really critical into having a beautiful garment outcome. So press, sew a seam, press it, sew a seam, press it. And when I press it, I press the seam flat, just like I sew it, and then I press it away. And I have pressed these seams towards the center of the garment. So this, you can see this is the center front, right? And this is the side front. So I'm pressing the seams towards the center on the dress, and that will help with the princess seaming. On the lining, I'll press them the other way so I don't have double seams here. We don't need that. But on the lining, I'll consciously press them away. But I want this look on the front where the seams are pressed to the center front, or everything else is pressed to the center back. So that is done, and now we are going to put the interfacing on. And this is a little different than what you're used to, because there's no regular facing, because we're lining the garment. But what we're going to do is we're going to take our facing piece, which is piece 4. Piece 4, that's a funny looking piece, and we just cut interfacing out of this. And we're going to find the nubbly side of the interfacing. Mine is an iron-on, so this should be a gluey side. And it's going to get pressed on to each piece, the wrong side of the piece, this way. So I'm just going to take this to my iron, and I'm going to fuse this to the front. And again, I use Tricot stretchy interfacing. And then I'm going to do, after I press this seam, I'm going to do the reverse for this side. I am going to steam on, according to the manufacturer's instructions, my interfacing on this side. One of the things you want to do with press-on interfacing is you don't want to run your iron back and forth, because it will move this. So you want to take your iron and hold it for whatever the manufacturer's count is. With this one, it's 10, so I put it down and hold it, count to 10, lift it up, put it down again, the iron, and count to 10, lift the iron up and put it down again. And then that way this doesn't shift on me and get all rumply, because then you have to peel it off and you have to start again, and that's a problem. We don't want to do that. So we're going to go add the interfacing to the front of these pieces, and then we're going to really start motoring along on some of our sewing. A couple of things about interfacing I want to mention. When you go to attach your interfacing to your fashion fabric, you want to lay your fashion fabric face down. You want to put a piece of scrap on your ironing board first, then lay your fashion fabric down, and then put another piece of scrap over this once it's in the right place, and press it that way, because this stuff is nasty if it gets stuck to your ironing board or your iron, and you don't want that to happen. And you can see sometimes, we just don't cut everything the right way, and I miscut my interfacing a little bit, so I'm just going to lop that off. But if I hadn't had something on underneath my garment, this would have stuck to my ironing board cover, and it would have been absolutely nasty. All right, so there you have it. Beautiful interfacing. We did the left side and the right side. So I have my 2 fronts all ready to go. Let's put them so you can see them. They're nice and pressed. They're shaped correctly. You can see here's my neckline. Here's my shoulder seams, my armholes. So we are going to go to step 7. Pin front sections together. Stitch center front seam from lower edge to large circle. So this is pattern piece 1. This is my pattern piece 1, and you can see that there's this large circle here on the center front. So I'm just going to lay this over one of my pieces. I only have to do one. Right? And I'm going to find where that circle is, and I'm just going to put a pin. You can mark it with chalk. I'm going to put a pin there, so I know that's where I want to go. So now I'm going to take the left side and the right side and put them together. I'm going to line up this edge, this neck edge right here, and where I've put this marking pin, I'm going to pin them together with 2 pins. And when I use 2 pins side by side to me, that's an indicator to stop sewing. So now I have my center pin marked, and I didn't have to clip through my fabric. I didn't have to do anything else. So I'm going to start at the bottom here and pin the two fronts together at the bottom, and then pin all the way along to where I have that double pin here and stitch that. And then we'll be ready to move on to the back. All right. We are on step 8, and we are going to work on these side back pieces, and they're constructed exactly the way the side front pieces are constructed. You have, this is piece 5, and they want you to stay stitch along this straight edge opposite from the armhole. That's because it's cut a little bit on the bias and you don't want it to stretch. So stay stitching is just a row of stitching singly. It's not, there's nothing attached to this, just to keep that fabric from stretching, because if it stretches out of shape, there's no way back, and then those seams will be rumply. And then we're going to sew these, the bottom half of the side back and the top half of the side back together. All right. So now we have our side back on one side, and we've sewn them together, and our side back on the other side. And now we need to sew the center back in here. So what we're going, and we're putting a zipper in this. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew them to each piece, but not sew the center seam. So I'm going to stitch the pieces together. Like this. You can see I lined up my neck edge, right? So I like to line up my pieces. It makes my life so much simpler because I can see what's going on. I always lay them out. Even now, I've been sewing for years, I still lay the pieces out in front of me so I can make sure that I don't sew this to this and this to this by accident, right? So you're gonna match up your notches if you've marked them, and you're going to sew these together. And I will, before I take it to the machine, I just flip them over. Now I know where they are. I'm going to stick a quick little pin in them so I can pin them the way they're supposed to be. But now I know they're right. And I'm going to stitch that and press the seams towards the center. All right, we just completed step 11, where we sewed the back, the side back to the back, to the center back. And I want to talk to you about pressing, right? We said that, oops, I have two pieces here. We said that we wanted to press down, which we did on this two-piece side back. You can see the seam allowance here is pressed down, and then we want to press towards the center. So this is my center back. So I've pressed it towards the center. So when you press, you want to press it flat, right? Press the whole seam flat, and then press it towards whatever direction you're going to go on. And you want to check the front. Look at how pretty that seam is, right? This junction lays nice and flat because this is pressed down, and I pressed it before I sewed the next seam, and then this seam is nice and flat. So you have this really flat junction here. You take the time and press. That's super important. Now, we attached our interfacing to the back neck edge, just like we did with the front. Mine, you'll notice, is a little short on either ends because I just don't like all of that extra interfacing in my seam allowance. You can leave it there, it's not a problem, but you can also trim it a little shorter if you prefer to. And that is step 12. Now, on the directions, if you're going by the directions, the next step is to sew the shoulder seams. We are not going to do that. We're going to put a zipper in because we're using an invisible zipper, and this calls for a traditional zipper. I prefer the invisible zipper. It is so easy to put in, and it looks so much better. So we're going to walk through that step really quickly because it's super simple. So this is an invisible zipper, right? You can see right down here it says polyester, 100% polyester, invisible zipper. This is the color I want. It's not the right size, but I just use this to show you. You want a 22 inch zipper for a dress. That makes the most sense. I'm going to open this zipper up so you can see what it looks like when it comes out of the package. and it's invisible because the teeth are in the back. So in the front, it's flat, and the teeth roll back. So as you unzip, you can see that the teeth are all rolled to the back on this, right? The first thing we want to do to make it easy for us to put it in is to iron those teeth flat. We want to roll them out and press them. So this one's been pressed. This is plastic. Don't use like the ultimate setting on your iron. You just want to roll them out a little bit. It just makes it easier to stitch them, and then they'll roll back in again once you zip it back up, right? And the thing about an invisible zipper is that it's actually forgiving. You can sew it, and if it's not close enough or it's not exactly the way you want it, you can stitch it again. So that works out really, really well. But it is a little tricky, and you do have to lay your pieces out in front of you. So I have, this is my back side, one side, right? And here is my other side back, my back. There we go. So again, with this invisible zipper, I always lay everything out because you very easily could make a mistake. So I've opened up my zipper and I've pressed it. I'm going to close it up right now only because I want to show you what we're going to do. Now you can see how it's all rumply, and that's because it's folding in on itself, where this one is nice and flat. The reason it's doing that is because I ironed those teeth, and those teeth are bucking. But essentially, this is how we want it to look, right? We want the right side of the side, the right side of the side, and the right side of the zipper. And this is actually going to sew on like that, and it's going to disappear. So I want to sew the right side of this part of the dress, which is the right back. It's the right part of the back on your screen. It's the right part of the back. And I want to sew it to the right side of the zipper. So I'm going to flip the zipper over. So let's go through that again. I have both right sides of my fabric up. This is my center back seam. I have the zipper facing right side up, and I want to sew the right side of this flange of the zipper to the right side of the back. So I'm just going to flip it over and pin it in place. And I want to make sure, I'm just pinning it in place so I know that those are the sides that go together. So right now that's what I'm going to deal with. And I'm going to unzip it because now I know it's in the right spot. So when you unzip it, this is what it's going to look like. And this is the picture on the instructions that come in your packet. This is what the instructions look like. So you have the right side of your fabric and the right side of the zipper pinned to the fabric. You want to make sure that when you start to sew this, that the top of this zipper, right, is at the neck edge of your fabric, because you're going to sew the lining to this that will close this dress out, or normally you would do a facing or some kind of finishing edge. In this particular pattern, we're doing a lining, and it's going to finish it off there. So I'm going to go take it to my machine, put my zipper foot in, and I'm going to stitch this all the way down until I can't go any further. I don't have to go all the way to the zipper head, just as down as far as I can go. And I'm going to stitch it as close to the teeth as possible, matching the flange to the side seam allowance, right? Okay, so we're going to go take care of that now. Alrighty, this is a beautiful thing. I've sewn my zipper to that side of the back. You can see I've sewn it all the way along. Now I'm going to zip it up just to check, to make sure that I didn't catch any of the teeth in the seam, because that would be a serious problem. If you catch the teeth, you can't zip it up, so then you would have to rip it out, and you want to do that now on this side. So look at that. My dress, this fabric is very bouncy, so once this is pressed it will be nice, but I'm not going to press it right at the moment. So you can see I have this beautiful finished seam on this side of the zipper. Look at that, right? The teeth are right there. Super nice. Now I'm going to bring my other side back together with this zipper. And remember, this is going to sew to the right side of this flange to the right side of this fabric. So I'm going to unzip it again, now that I know that it zips, and flip this over so the right side of my flange is going to be sewn to the right side of my dress. All right. A couple of things you want to make sure of. You want to be aware that this is all the same. You don't want one of these way up here. So again, the top of your zipper tape needs to match the raw neck edge. And the other thing you want to do is you want to drag it down to the bottom, kind of smooth it out a little, and figure out where you finished. And you'll see I have maybe a 2-inch tail, but I want to stop on this side at the exact same spot as I did on the other side. So I'm putting a pin in where I have to stop. And now I'm going to go and sew this part of the zipper to this part of the dress. All right, here's my pile. This part gets a little scary because it is all twisted around, so don't freak out. But you can see I stitched this side, very similar to the way I stitched, right down to where my pin was. We'll see how close I came. Now, when you start to zip it up, everything is kind of twisted a little bit. You have to fluff with it to get it zipped, but there we go. Voila, we have a beautiful zipper. Now, if this, you can see here that this is really nice and you don't see the zipper at all. A little bit further down, I was too far away. So I'm just going to go back and re-stitch that part of the zipper. I'm going to open this up again and just re-stitch that part of the zipper so it's closer, because although it looks fine like this, once I press it, you're going to see it open, and if I stretch my back, you're going to see that zipper, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go back in and trim up those seams, but I'm pretty happy about that. And then this I missed. Look at that. I missed by quite a bit. So I want to go back and make sure to bring this down to the same place. So these are easy fixes because you already have your zipper foot in the machine, and you want to make sure this zipper is in perfectly before you go and move to the next step. But we're almost done. I mean, this is like, the dress part is almost completely finished at this point. So I'm going to go fix my zippers, and I'll come back and show you how to finish the rest of the seam, and we'll move on. All right, we have our zipper in. I went back and stitched it a little closer, and I pressed it, and it looks beautiful, and I fixed the tail so they end at the same spot. Right. How nice is that, right? You don't even see it. The whole point of having an invisible zipper, they're so much nicer and so much more modern than the old-fashioned lap zippers. So now we need to close up this end and finish the seam. And this, sometimes you need to take a hand stitch or two here, but you want to put right sides together, right? This is the rest of the back of our dress, so we're gonna finish off this seam, right? That's our goal. But we need to get into right where we ended, and that's why we want to end them at the exact same spot. So if you can get right in there at the end and just keep this little tail out of the way, and start with your zipper foot and start where you finished, and just go an inch or two with the zipper foot, because you can't get into this spot with your regular general purpose foot, and then you can change your general purpose foot and finish the seam all the way down with that. If you can't get in here with your zipper foot, just take a needle and thread and do a few stitches by hand just to hold it, because you don't want to bump on the other side. And if you want to take this out, I don't think it's a problem, but on some fabrics that are more slinky, it is a problem. You just whip stitch these teeth together, because you have this stitch down here that keeps the teeth together, keeps the zipper from coming apart. So if you want to cut this off, before you do that, you want to take a needle and thread and whip stitch these teeth together below where the zipper is sewn to the dress, and then you can cut this off. But I don't think it's necessary for this one, particularly since it's lying. There's plenty of fabric there. But if you're going to do an online version and you can see it, then you're going to want to take it off, because that isn't a very good look on the back side. So I'm going to finish this seam. Then I'm going to sew the front to the back at the shoulders according to the directions, and then put together the lining exactly the same way as I put the front together. And I'm going to bring the lining all the way to this point. Obviously the lining doesn't have a zipper, and we don't sew up the back seam on the lining, but everything else will be the same. So I'm going to finish up the lining, I'm going to fix the zipper in, finish up the lining, and I come back, we're going to put the whole dress together. Yay! All right, we have our dress all put together. We have our lining all put together, exactly the same manner as the dress. And here is the one issue that we're going to run into with putting the invisible zipper in early, is that you can't sew the armholes and the neck hole and then pull the dress all the way through, because the zipper has closed up the back portion of the garment. But what we are going to do is we're going to sew the neck edge and then just bind the armholes. That gives you the opportunity to add a different design element on the armhole if you would like, or bind them up if you don't want to do the binding. And I will put the link to the binding instructions below. But if you don't want to do the binding, then you put the zipper in at the end. But the problem with that is you have to deal with all of this. So in my mind, it's much simpler to do the binding at the end on the sleeves than it is to insert the zipper when you have all of this extra garment going on here. So what we have, I open up my zipper, I have my dress right side up and my lining right side down, so they're meeting each other, and I'm going to start pinning around the neckline. Now you have seam allowances going one way, your other seam allowances should go the opposite direction. What this is going to do is it's going to close up the neckline and give you a really nice seam and finish on the neckline. So if you don't open your seams when you press them, if you press them to one side, then make sure that they're pressed to the opposite side of each other when you go to sew this together. And they will butt up very carefully. And if you do put the zipper in like we did, you're just going to fold the edge of your lining back on itself, and that creates a little seam allowance. So when you turn it over, that edge will be finished also. And we're just going to go around and match up all of the corners and edges and seam allowances, and then we're going to stitch all the way around. And what that does is when we turn it right sides out, our neck edge will be completely finished, which is perfect. And then we'll bind the armholes and sew up the side seams, or sew up the side seams and bind the armholes. You can do it either way. We've sewn our lining to our dress at the neckline, and I started here at the V in the front, and I started on one side and just back tacked just a smidge, and then sewed straight up and off, because you want a nice crisp corner there. Then come back on and sew around until you get to the zipper, and then do the same on the other side. Now these curves need to be clipped because the fabric needs a place to go. So we're going to clip to, but not through the seam allowance. So this gives the fabric some place to move. It also weakens the strength of the fabric, so I don't particularly like clipping into fabric, but it becomes a necessity when you have a curve like this one. So if you are going to, at this point, sew the sleeves also and work according to the instructions, putting the zipper in afterwards, you would do the same thing. You would have to clip the curves. To turn this corner, I want to fold one seam allowance back and then fold the other seam allowance back, and you can see I have a beautiful corner right there. All right, so let me do it again. I'm going to fold one seam allowance back, I'm going to fold the other seam allowance back, then I'm going to get my thumb in there for my other hand, which is tricky because we have gobs and gobs of fabric. But I want to get my finger and my thumb inside so I can hold that corner that I've folded. So my thumb is in between my lining and my dress fabric, and my finger's on the outside, and I'm going to hold that beautiful corner and just push it through. And look at that. That's gorgeous, right? Absolutely beautiful. So I want to check all of my seams. This will also need to be clipped. This is the corner edge of the V-neck of the dress, but I want to check them and make sure that I don't have any rumples or bubbles and that my corners turn well. Because if you're off at an angle, if you don't have an exact straight seam, your corners won't turn well. So I've folded that again, one seam and then the other, and then I'm gonna get my finger and my thumb in there and turn it over. And I mean, it's sometimes you have to do it twice, but that's a pretty nice corner. And again, I'm gonna check and make sure that I don't have any pleats. Now I'm gonna go back to, I'm gonna undo my corners. I'm gonna go back and I want to understitch the lining as far as I can. And what that means is I'm going to stitch the lining to the seam allowance as far as I can. I'm not going to get right into this corner here. I'm not going to get totally into this corner here. I'm going to get close. Same thing with going around the underarm. Because what that does is it anchors the lining to the seam allowance and it gives you a much better turn. You want to take care when you do that, that this lining is pulled flush, because you're going to be sewing on this side here on the lining, and you're sewing the seam allowance to the lining, and you don't want the lining to have a bubble in it like that. So you want to make sure as you're sewing it, it's flat. After I understitch my neckline, I am going to turn everything inside, give it a good press, and then I'm going to sew up the side seams of my dress and the side seams of my lining separately. Okay, I want to take a quick moment after we have sewn the neckline and turned it around and pressed it. You can see now that the lining is attached to the fabric, it really has so much more body. I have understitched the lining to the seam allowance, right? You don't see it on the front, it's just on the back, and that helps me turn it and give me a much nicer, cleaner turn. And then you want to check and make sure that your, you want to check and make sure that your points line up, everything looks great. Now our side seams are open, and there's a lot of fabric flopping around here. You kind of have to play around with it to make sure that everything is going in the right direction. So now I'm going to turn the dress right sides together and sew up the side seams, and I'm going to do the same thing with the lining. I'm going to sew the side seams right side together, and then we'll deal with the arms and finishing up the zipper, because the lining in the back, right, is open. We have kind of two pieces flopping around here. This edge needs to get attached to the zipper on the inside so it's not flopping around. But we'll deal with that, and then we're done. And then I have options if you don't want to put in a zipper, or if you don't want to, if you want to put the zipper in afterwards and sew the edges, sew the armholes, you would do them exactly the same way as you sew the neck. As long as the back is open and separate, you can pull it all through the shoulder seam, which is the way the instructions have you do it. And then they have you apply the zipper, which is perfectly fine, but you're dealing with all of this fabric. So that is a personal choice. For me, it's so much easier and cleaner to just bind the armholes. All right, let's talk a minute about these seams. My neck is all good. I'm happy with the way that came out. And I have the dress and the lining attached at the neck. Remember, we're going off of the written instructions and we're adding the zipper in ahead of time. So now I've sewn the side seams of the dress. So the dress is essentially completed. And then I have the lining, and I have sewn the side seams of the lining. I've also sewn up this center back seam except where the zipper is. All right, so this is open because this is going to get hand stitched to the zipper. So I want you to keep in mind that this method that we're doing is a much more refined construction method, because you're going to get a more beautiful finish, right? Because it's a sleeveless garment, if you have white lining or a contrasting lining on the open sleeve, when you move your arm, you're going to be able to see it, but by binding it, you give it a really nice finish. So I have all my internal side seams done, and the back seam for the zipper only part way. I'm going to turn it inside right. that lining gives it so much body and depth. So now we need to take care of our armholes. And first thing I'm going to do is match up my shoulder seams. And I'm just stitching these, I'm just pinning these wrong sides together, and I'm going to baste them because it will make my life so much easier than trying to have all of this stuff waffling around. See, this is going to the back. So I'm just butting up those seams, and if we did everything right, the lining should fit the armhole perfectly, like it does. I'm just going to pin it a little bit, and I'm just going to run inside the seam allowance. I'm just going to run a stitch just to hold them together. So this is the wrong side of the dress to the wrong side of the lining. They're basically just going to hold them in place. And then what we need to do is finish this off. So you have an option. I mean, you can use this binding. This is store-bought. See how stiff it is? It almost stands up on its own. It's terrible. This is so much softer, and it's going to match your garment. And essentially, I'm going to attach the binding after I sew my armhole together, giving me one unit, so I'm not dealing with multiple pieces. I'm going to attach the binding, and I'm going to fold it to the inside, and then hand stitch it to the lining, and you'll never see that from the outside, but yet if you move your arm a little bit, the inside has this really nice finish going on. Then, so we're going to hand stitch that down. I'll show you once we get it on, I'll show you how that's done. Now we're going to hand stitch our zipper lining to our zipper because it's open and we need to have this open. So we're going to take some pins, pin this down, fold a little seam allowance underneath on the lining, and pin this down on either side of the zipper tape, and then hand stitch that all the way down on both sides. And what you're going to end up with is a really lovely finished garment that looks high-end. These finishes are going to be high-end. If your zipper is a little low, mine goes right up to the top. If your zipper is a little low, you can put a hook and eye there. Not necessary. And then we're going to hem it. And we're done. Here we go with the sleeves. So I cut a strip of bias binding. This one is 1 3/4 inches wide, and I will put the links to the instructions for bias binding in the documentation. And then I turned under 1/4 inch to the wrong side. That's just so it's already there, so it's finished. And what I want to do is this sleeve opening. I've already stitched my lining to my sleeve, so it's one unit. It's just easier to deal with. And I'm going to pin my bias binding so the folded edge is away from the seam. And I'm going to pin this all the way around. I'm not going to start sewing right at the edge. I'm going to leave a little bit of flange here, so when I come around, I'll have a finish. So I'm going to make this go all the way around, and then I have, through the magic of video, this has been stitched on. And at the bottom, what I did was I have this edge, it's folded over so it will finish this edge. So I don't have a raw edge there. And I'm going to understitch all of this all the way around. So I'm going to stitch the facing to the seam allowance and then turn the whole thing under. And this will be a beautiful finished edge. And on the inside, I have this raw edge that I folded in, and I'm just going to hand stitch that to the lining. So I'm going to go finish these sleeves up, and then we'll talk. Hi, here we are. We're finished with our giraffe print dress. Little V front, Vogue 9050. Right? Very cute. I'll show you a full length version in a minute. But I love the way it fits. I love the princess lines. This one has a zipper and it's completely lined and it looks fabulous because this is linen and it will get a little wrinkly and it is a little transparent, so you want a lining. I also made a second version of this dress. If you don't want to mess with this V collar, you can just put a round edge on the pattern piece when you lay it down, cut this, trim this away, and make it round. Make this straight, right? And put this on the fold, because now you don't need the seam here, because you need the seam to open this up. So there's no center seam in this one, which is great because I like this pattern and the way it looks and has a nice little rounded edge. And then instead of putting facings on the sleeve, I added this little cap, and it's just a 4.5 inch piece folded wrong sides together and then sewn around the top of the sleeve, and then underneath it's finished. So you'll see that one in a minute also. What I love about this is this gives it a little bit of a modern edge, right? Without looking so, ladies' lunch. This is more ladies' lunch. This is more a little out to dinner. And I added a stretch faux leather on either side. So I eliminated the zipper because this can actually go over your head, so there's no need to put a zipper in the back. So we've eliminated the seam in the front, we've eliminated the zipper and added the sleeve, and you have a totally different looking dress, right? And I'm going to show you that right now. And here we are. How cute is this, right? It's a little faux leather print on a light cotton, and then this faux stretch leather on the side. So no zipper because it can go over the head. Really quick little sleeves that gives it a little kind of edgy modern look. No neckline to fool around with. I just made a round neckline and used a bias binding on the inside, and voila, we have a dress. You could start with this one and get the fit right, and then move on to something like this with the lining and everything. It's a little bit more complicated if you have to adjust the fit after you make the first garment. Just make sure that when you make it without the lining that you use something that has some body and some heft to it. But yeah, if you put something a little stretchy, and these black side panels are kind of nice, right? They're supposed to be very slimming. We could all use a little bit of that, right? So I hope you enjoyed our Vogue 9050 sew along, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Bye.